There's a vast amount of racism in American film, but this might be one of the most racist films we've done.
No, the religion is actually just manipulating people and leading people into unjust wars for no good reason other than to keep the rich rich. Whoa, man, mind blown.
But you're not thinking like a capitalist there.
I'm not. That's always been my problem.
It's a nice liberal nationalist movie where the president can go blow up aliens with a jet fighter, and yet you're still not actually being xenophobic. It's kind of amazing.
The whole QAnon universe, I was like, this seems ripe for them to grab onto one of these two movies and totally miss the point.
Yes.
And they have.
You know, the best they really have is like gentrification and real estate speculation in hospitals.
Yeah, that's that's Cleveland in a nutshell right there.
Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff. It is a movie that should be watched by organizers and radicals and leftists and anybody who wants to make a better world. This movie, on the other hand, means none of those things.
It's a Franken blockbuster, like you said, and it's put together in sequences that play out like movie trailers.
Really regressive gender politics, like incredible, but to the point of near parody.
No, Norm, George Wendt in this movie definitely would have been wearing a MAGA hat if this movie was made nowadays.
Oh, God, right? And then convince the workers to break their own picket.
Yeah.
Fuck this movie. It's,
Damn, I wish this movie was better, because that's a kick-ass ending.
This is a paint-by-numbers propaganda movie that completely works because the characters are compelling and real.
Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we're looking at City of Hope, directed by John Sayles and starring a whole bunch of people. This is a pretty large ensemble. Stars everybody. This is our first John Sayles, which is amazing, considering how long this podcast has been going.
True, but not the last.
But not the last by any means.
Not the last. The Roger Ebert review I read for City of Hope, he quotes a friend of his after the screening telling him that the tally count they had for characters in this movie was 36. And I don't doubt that. I'd say easily 30 plus characters. Also, the way we do our intros with the director of the film is usually who we highlight. In this particular case, we've got writer, director, and editor, John Sayles. As listeners to more than just this episode will know, I'm fascinated with directors who not only are directors, but also writers. But when you choose something else besides being a writer, director, I think it's really fascinating when someone like a Steven Soderbergh is also like cinematographer, or someone like John Sayles is also the editor. Or like we were talking about The Watermelon Woman, Cheryl Dunye's film, just everything, like cinematographer, editor, writer, producer, director. Like those are the ones, because I think it's such an easy shorthand for like, okay, this is a project. This is a piece that this person wanted to get out to the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is, well, and, this is clearly like a deep passion project, but also on a subject that he knows really well.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also, I mean, it's an impressive piece of juggling. I have a few little qualms that we can get into, but it's also like an incredible political movie, right? Which, of course, what John Sayles is known for, but I think it really captures a particular moment. I mean, it's very relevant to today as well.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
So we should actually say, and this is part of our rough series for the summer on sort of American urban landscapes and movies, which is an incredibly wide subject, of which some of the most important and famous movies of all time have been about. But we're not doing those movies, by and large. Not really by an official choice, but I feel like we've chosen ones that are considerably more obscure.
Well, it's the nature of what we're interested in, for one, but also what we wanted to look at and to highlight. Because, if you want, I'm trying to think of another like American urban landscape film off the top of my head here. Like we did Falling Down, which is not obscure, I don't think at all. If you're a film watcher of a particular age, that was a big Michael Douglas one in the 90s. But we also tend to go for some of the more obscure independent or world cinema ones because there's something that we want to highlight and bring some attention to.
Well, I think when I say it's like you could easily have done Mean Streets for this.
Yeah.
You could have easily done any number of the most famous movies of all time in America about Italians from 1970 to 1979. And I feel like we're sort of eschewing most of that crop, even though they're great movies, and we'd love to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an element too where I think within this theme, we were kind of wanted to be careful in picking, well, especially as we go through the next couple of films here, like we're picking different types of experiences within the American urban landscape as well. Like this one is very different from the previous one, Falling Down, as we mentioned with Michael Douglas and Robert Duvall, where in that one you're watching kind of a 90s equivalent of a modern mass shooter who just doesn't get to the shooting part at the end of the film. It's very different. The landscape is very similar, but the characters are very, very different in this one.
Well, part of it is that whereas the previous movie in many ways is part of the sort of reaction to changing America, sort of white reaction to changing America, a reactionary reaction, but also is a deeply confused movie about what it wants to do, which is a lot of what we talked about
Right.
last time.
Right.
This is John Sayles. He's going to have a very sophisticated and complicated approach to urban politics,
Sure.
but he's not confused. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows exactly what his political points are. And so part of it is you're seeing somebody, who's one of our preeminent political filmmakers, who is not going to like confuse his heroes for villains, but actually just not allow there to be them. Well, some people are. The cops in this movie just suck, but that's normal.
Yeah. What a surprise. He's reflecting reality. I honestly, I thought some of my first reactions after watching this movie, this is a first time watch for me. I think it was for you as well, right, Isaac?
Yes. Yeah,
So
I'd
you
never
felt-
seen this. It's really hard to get a hold of.
Well, that was another thing too, whereas like we're more interested in following, our instincts or our interests, regardless of how readily available they are, which is a thing that's a problem with John Sayles movies. I mean, I was buying them on DVDs because I want to own them, but in the world of streaming right now, this one is a little tougher to find because it's only available for rentals.
Right.
But so I was going to say, one of my first thoughts after finishing this movie was our discussion when we did the episode "Communism on Film," and we were talking about like what a political director, behind the camera, means for the content you're seeing in the film, versus somebody who maybe isn't as overtly political behind the camera when they're trying to put politics on film.
Right.
And this one seemed like a pretty remarkable example of that.
Right. This is someone who's going to have a thesis,
Mhm.
and not in a ham-fisted way, or if in a ham-fisted way, in a way that's still effective.
Well, it's also not in a propagandistic way, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad sense. In this particular case, you've got like clearly like a leftist filmmaker here. Actually, he even has overlap because he worked with Haskell Wexler, who we have previously raved about, on Matewan, which is a film we will get to at some point, I'm sure, in the life of this show. The propaganda way I mean here is like you have a filmmaker who probably has some clear ideas on maybe the role of like unions in contemporary society, meaning in this case 1991, but it's not propagandistic and like, oh, this is the way to do it. Like he's showing you an interesting dramatization of like, okay, here's some corruption here, but is that really the worst thing ever, going on? Or, he's clearly like a pro-union kind of guy, but his representation within this movie is like, that doesn't seem very good. There's corruption here. There's a little bit of warmth here. There's a little, okay, well, that actually worked out right here. It's a nuanced portrayal. It's a nuanced examination rather than just being one thing and trying to push an agenda. It's more of, a well-structured dramatic arc that touches on a lot of political points that he's interested in and knowledgeable about.
See, I think that the movie has a more, yes, it's nuanced, but in terms of the overall city structure. So, okay, let's say what this movie is about before we keep going. So,
go ahead, Isaac. Summarize this movie real quickly for everybody.
Oh, good grief. Normally we take the IMBD and maybe add on to it.
I've got it in front of me if you want me to read it to you.
It's plot intersecting tale with multitude of characters living lives which in one way or another revolve around an old apartment block scheduled to be demolished. This literally means nothing.
No.
This is a movie about a moment in a relatively small New Jersey town with a relatively small black population, predominantly sort of white ethnic Italians and maybe an Irish, at a point in which it looks from multiple positions, from a black city council member to a family of Italian, of that part, sort of the wing of things, contractor who is, and his son, who are both grappling with the social position and the contradictions and hypocrisies in their lives, and also deals with the city machinery and patronage networks as they prepare to start, with the help of the district attorney, basically blackmailing the mayor, who's corrupt enough as it is, into beginning a process of gentrification, which would target, at the behest of outside capital, right? Big capital, international capital. It's all of these things at once, and they're all interconnected, and they're all flowing in. So it's a look at big city machines, is a look at the way that we're entrapped. I don't know. I mean, that's more of analysis than a description.
Yeah.
From the critically acclaimed director of 8 Men Out and Mate One.
These people are on the street.
Walk out to your door. It's a friggin' lunatic asylum.
L Street has to come down for Galaxy Towers to go up.
City of Hope.
I'm a free man today, Bobby. Shit is gonna happen. Important stuff. Feel it.
Siskel and Ebert give it 2 thumbs up.
I raised the rent of the vacancy. I had the heat off for 3 weeks in March. These people are not leaving.
I can handle it.
David Anson of Newsweek hails it's remarkable.
People do favors for me. I do favors for them.
If you can't get respect, you settle for fear.
Peter Travers of Rolling Stone calls it riveting, gutsy, knockdown entertainment.
The DA's office is butting into it. You're using my kid against me like this?
And the New York Post says it's sensational.
Already put things in motion.
What does that mean?
City of Hope stars Vincent Spano, Tony LoBianco, and Joe Morton.
I think Dad might be in trouble.
It's the film that critics are comparing to American epics like the Godfather movies. City of Hope.
Help! Over here!
Yeah, it's one of those you can't really like summarize too well. Again, we said at the top of the show here just a couple moments ago, 30 plus characters going on in this. And the interesting thing that I find within this narrative is that it's a collection of, in other movies, what would be background stories. Those plot lines that really like provide depth, or as you've mentioned before, Isaac, like looking for that texture. Like, oh, this feels real. This feels lived in. It feels like a collection of those type of characters, but in this case, that is the plot in this film. Normally you'd have all of these types of characters, I think, all around, like, I don't know, like trying to think like 1991, like Tom Cruise is running for like mayor, and these are all like the really well drawn out characters that are all around him, but really it's like his story. But in this case, we take out that nonsense. We don't need like the star performance here to hold everything together. I feel like the star performance in this particular case is actually the camera and the way that it moves around and shows you how these characters intersect and interact with each other. Actually, interact might not even be the right word, because there's these times when the camera moves around and the characters don't even realize that the person they just passed is also a character we're following, because they never even interact together, which I think is really kind of fascinating. Actually, I have a quick clip here. John Sayles kind of talking about like the way he put together his narrative with this movie.
It's a very complex movie, with people with all everybody has their own agenda. And the one thing that I was able to do is there are a lot of master shots in it where you trade from one group of people to another group of people, or from this guy doing this scam to this guy with this agenda without a cut. And a lot of the point of that was these are people who, because of their prejudices or because of their limited interest and point of view, think those people, whoever those people are, have nothing to do with my life. When in fact, as the circle kind of becomes a full circle, you realize everything you do in a system like that does affect somebody else, negatively or positively.
Which I think is a really great way to kind of summarize what he's doing there in this particular film, which is also fascinating then, because then on the page, since he's also the writer in this particular case, I'm always curious, like how much was he visualizing this as he was writing it? versus like when you get on the set and you're like, okay, well, this can overlap here, this can overlap there. I did want to mention real quick too, a frequent collaborator with John Sayles, at least at this point in his career, was, or at least two that I can think of, Robert Richardson, famed cinematographer who worked with Oliver Stone early on in his career, then would go on to work with Martin Scorsese during his like late 90s, early 2000s, up to the early 2000s. I think he did Hugo was his last one, possibly with him. And then he started working with Tarantino, with Django Unchained and Kill Bill. So really fascinating cinematographer. And in the time period that we're looking at here with City of Hope, it's the same year he filmed The Doors and JFK with Oliver Stone. And I think 8 Men Out was the first one he worked on with John Sayles. But so if you're familiar with any of with Robert Richardson's cinematography, especially his Scorsese stuff, he uses these great like pools of light. So there's these really strong shadows, and then these really like just picturing any scene in this movie where they're walking around at night, like the way the streetlights are lit. Like the characters move in and out of like pretty severe darkness when they're not in a streetlight here. It's just a really interesting way that especially because we have this theme here of the American urban landscapes. I was really thinking about the way that Richardson has shot those, even in like, The Doors or Casino, or a little bit in Wall Street, actually, which was before this one, the way he was shooting New York City in Wall Street with Oliver Stone. It has a very specific kind of like urban look, even just to the way he shoots them.
Right.
Versus like maybe a Michael Mann or something, which I find kind of interesting as far as the visual look goes. But do you want to maybe discuss a little bit more here in the filmmaking, since we're kind of diving in with John Sayles, and then get into some of the politics, Isaac?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. It's very hard for me to not talk about the politics.
Well, we don't have to keep it completely separate. I just meant like it's.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, for me, the little weakness I feel. So I think that if there's two main characters to this movie, and it's Wynn, who is a Black City Council member, who's former college professor, who is trying to sort of find his feet as a local politician, and figure out how to to sort of keep his conscience above board while also dealing with political threats within the Black community.
Well, also trying to like help too. Like he ran out of good intentions. Like he wanted to get shit done.
Well, he's the most moral character in the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has to make certain compromises in order to keep going, but he's doing it in order to direct, I think, people toward. Well, we'll get into the politics of the way that politics is portrayed in a second, but I think he's trying to align all of the different interests here in a way that fits with his beliefs. And then the other one is Nick Rinaldi, played by Vincent Spano, who is the son of a local contractor and slumlord, the owner of the place that's going to be cleared out in order to build a new luxury buildings and shopping malls and so forth.
Yeah, the old apartment block as referenced in the shitty IMDb synopsis.
Right. In which, part of what he's dealing with is the fact that he's always been backed by his father, right, in everything that he does. He has a construction job at his father's construction site at the beginning of the movie that he quits. Right. So he gets in trouble for committing crimes with his buddies instead of dealing with this. And then he's also under the continuous shadow of his older brother, who died in Vietnam, but, spoilers for a 30-year-old movie. Actually, this is one you probably haven't seen, so actual spoilers. Seriously, spoilers for a second. Who ultimately turns out to not have been as heroic as he seemed, and in some ways that was covered up as well. And so, like, that's his arc, and he's trying to define himself, and he's also, he's trying to, date this woman. He's trying to, and the truth of it is, I think it's an interesting cockpit to sort of see this family, this sort of, this sort of low-level new capitalist family, right? I think they're first generation and just having some sort of money. And his father's position is really interesting as well. This is getting into the politics of being someone who is thought that he had built independence by making money, but in fact is completely enmeshed in the city's machine and can be crushed at any time they want. and the horror of him realizing that as he tries to protect his son from his own crimes. But I basically actually don't find him as interesting as a lot of the other characters, and I wish he had
Wait,
been
who's the he here in this one?
Oh,
The
sorry,
dad, or?
Vincent Spano. Like,
Okay.
in some ways, the moral conundrum of the father interests me more than the son, but also a lot of the other characters. It's not that I don't think he's an okay character or that I mind spending some time with him, but if anything, he almost feels like he takes you away. I don't know. He's fine. But I didn't need quite as much time with him. This isn't a massive problem with the movie, but it's, if there's one little thing I would.
Well, because it's most characters in this plot have something that's propelling them that they're either trying to achieve, whether that's a low level crime or getting. I'm going to mess up the phrasing here, but like when again, we should have also said too, played by Joe Morton, famous from Terminator 2. Judgment Day, but also with working with John Sayles from Brother from Another Planet all the way through Lone Star. He's trying to get like an education bill passed through city council. Tony LoBianco, who plays Vincent Spano's dad in this one, like he's trying to maintain his power in a shifting power dynamics within, like you said, kind of like low level crime. You also have John Sayles playing Carl, the local like guy who runs a chop shop. Kind of place that kind of directs all the low-level criminals to go out and do his bidding here and there. You've got motivations, you've got desires, you've got kind of plans, whether they're nefarious or good-hearted, on most of the characters except this Nick, Vincent Spano character you're talking about.
Right.
So I feel like that doesn't really quite have the propulsion once you get to his scenes where you're like, oh, he's trying to like score with this girl he just met, or like maybe he actually does have real feelings for her, and we don't know how that's going to end up playing out, but it's the one where like it's the least. Oh, you know what it is, Isaac? You're big on character arcs. It has the least character arc of any character in this story.
Yeah, I mean, he goes somewhere. It's not that he doesn't.
Right, but it's not quite as, like I said, propulsive or grabbing you the way that some of these other arcs are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't even find his moral, like I said, I don't find his moral conundrum even as interesting as his dad. And I don't particularly like being sympathetic with a slumlord, which is something this movie kind of does.
Sure.
I appreciate the nuance of that.
I was going to say, that's that nuance John Sayles, though. We're like, yeah, okay, evil slumlord, we could do that character, but what if I got you to sympathize a little bit with him?
Well, I think it's that he actually cares more than I can be sympathetic for him, even if he's a scuzzbag in one part of his life and not a scuzzbag in another.
Right.
He is a scuzzbag, but he also, like, hypothetically, part of it is, so basically he gets asked to facilitate a fire in this building so that you can move the people out, right? Which is a, classic developer's trick of, oh, there's just a mysterious fire. Who knew? And they screw up and, a child dies, which was not the plan.
I think it's two people. It's the mother and the child, isn't it?
Yeah, the mother and the child die, yeah. And he's very upset, and I'm sure he'd be very upset, but I'm just sort of like, is this the perspective I want to be spending all my time with here? Is this the most compelling dramatic thing of his angst over facilitating this? But there is, like I said, there's actually is a drama here to him.
Yeah.
Because he's being forced into doing this thing, which he doesn't want to do, both to defend his son, but also because realizing that in a patronage system like this, everybody's been breaking, and this is how authoritarian regimes tend to work, right? If you're in Egypt or whatever, people are always breaking the law. The law is brought in when they want to crush you. Regulations are used. The legality may be in the breach, but it actually can be deployed. So part of he ends up, there's this point where he basically goes to the representative of the mob and says, do I actually have to do this? And it's clear his actually, the project that he's doing was financed by the mob.
Right.
So the illusion that, this sort of petty bourgeois or lower level sort of, like entrepreneur developer type, seems to come from a working class background originally, has any independence in the system. Nobody does. Even the people at the apex of it have the most maneuverability, but all of them are part of a system that they don't totally control. So even the mayor, who has a huge amount of power to dole out patronage, because he's incredibly corrupt, is vulnerable to the influence of gentrifying outside capital, who gain their way in by paying off the district attorney who has power over the mayor because the mayor is corrupt, but won't exercise that power unless, as long as he does what he's told in terms of facilitating gentrification, and why does these aren't direct bribes to the district attorney? It's because he wants to run for higher office. So everybody's sort of everybody, what I feel like is this movie is so much about how everybody's trapped.
Yeah, the patronage part really kind of comes up in a way like it didn't jump out at me when I was watching it, but then when I was listening to some interviews with John Sayles, I grabbed a clip where like he's talking specifically about that. And again, this speaks to that nuance we're saying, where like, you think of like patronage or crony politics, in our current environment, you're like, oh, this is terrible stuff. But I thought John Sayles had an interesting perspective that I don't. Well, let me play the clip and then we'll see how well it applies to this film.
Yeah.
It's the only movie where I didn't have to do any research. I had written the script and I felt like, maybe things have changed. I'd lived in East Boston. I'd lived in Schenectady. I'd lived in Hoboken. I'd lived in a bunch of places like that and pretty much knew what the political system was. And I started, for about 3 days, I would read the Hudson Dispatch and the Jersey Journal. And it was like they read my screenplay. All these headlines they have ripped from my screenplay. How did they get in there? So I think it was a familiar American kind of corruption. And to me, what was interesting about that is to accept that patronage politics had its and has its function, and it's not all negative. That if you pay off. If it's, you vote for me and I give you jobs, within the community that you're giving the jobs to, that's something for something. It's a legitimate transaction. But that let's question this thing of, corruption is just bad. How do you tell somebody for the greater good, which might be a little abstract, amorphous, you're not going to give your cousin Vinny a job when you know that he's so incompetent that he's not going to be able to feed his family any other way? How do you do that? Sacrifice your family for this vague idea.
I thought that was kind of fascinating when I heard him say that, like, that's a standard politician promise you get. I mean, nowadays, but also way back when, back in the 90s too, like, vote for me and I'm going to bring jobs back. Vote for me and I'm going to get this plant to open up here. Vote for me and we'll get, better employment in this particular district. That's a transactional way that people have voted and politicians have spoke for a long period of time. And I love that he was just like, is that always bad?
But I think, part of it is that we're not dealing with like, I'm going to bring back the jobs. We're dealing with a specific patronage network in which there are personal relations that go down to the bottom of society. And I mean, the mob is involved in this for a reason, but it's not just the mob. And, we're talking about, Tammany Hall style party machines.
Oh, absolutely. And then like unions are wrapped up in that too, with this, the construction job that Vincent, Nick, played by Vincent Spano, walks away from in the first scene. So it's not that what Sayles is saying there is like how it was portrayed in the movie. That's just he's aware of like how this works out in the real world, and then what parts did he decide to bring in to his narrative to make it compelling and dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
and just the fact that he was like, it isn't always bad. Let's think about it, rather than just be like, patronage politics, this is always awful, period, end of story. And you're like, well, it's kind of how a lot of the system is set up right now too. Not that it makes it good. I'm just saying it's an example of him taking this interesting idea that's a real world scenario, and then he uses it in a nuanced way to create dramatic tension within this story.
What I'd actually say is it's not set up that way, by and large, at this point.
What do you mean?
Not in the way that it's portrayed here.
Portrayed in the movie, or what he just said?
No, what I mean is that we don't actually have as much of this sort of close and personal patronage sort of system in a lot of urban areas anymore. Like Chicago does not work by the machine. There may be a political elite, but it's not. So part of what it is that these sorts of personal connections mean that they can benefit working class constituencies in a particular way. But one of the things about anti-corruption, and this has been true historically, is that it tends to clear the way for bigger levels of corruption. That isn't always true. Obviously, huge levels of corruption are bad. Bigger levels of corruption that sort of that pave the way for more technocratic governance that's good for capitalism in general, and tends to damage the representation of working class people that he's talking about, right?
Mhm.
But like by and large, like like the mob, I could be wrong, and I don't know that much about like American urban politics, but like I think a lot of things are not the way they used to be. And so part of it is like this is an interesting movie because it's showing, maybe it's showing transition. It doesn't seem to be, but the people who are benefiting, basically the mayor openly says it. The Irish used to have it, now the Italians have it. He's doing this while he's glad handing and doing the patronage thing in an old folks home, right?
Yeah.
He's making sure this stuff works. And the basic position they're having is, okay, business is open, we're going to gentrify, and the people who will get screwed by this are people of color. So there are people who have benefited from this, and they tend to be Italians in this town.
I would say in this town, in this time period, right.
Right. But that's partially because that sort of system still exists because you haven't had white flight in this place. And you have this sort of cozy mayor who hasn't been like crushed by corruption investigations yet. But that, I don't think that's necessarily how things work today. Like Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, in a city that used to be very much run this way, was not that. He was just a neoliberal shill. He had his constituencies. They were like upper middle class white people.
Right.
But it's...
Well, because that urban landscape has, evolved.
Right. Exactly.
Where he took power there. And this is like such a snapshot of like late 80s, early 90s.
I really think it is. I think it's a system that's even transitioning at that point. But I think it is, part of it is like, we can talk about who it benefits, but like, it's very clear who it doesn't. And it doesn't. But the ultimate point is, and I think part of it is that Vincent's dad, right, Tony, represents this and this, I was saying this before, and I think this sort of contradicts this quote, but I'm sure this is what he meant, is ultimately this is an incredibly coercive and violent system. So he benefited from it. He got rich off of this system, but he'd best do what he's told because he can be broken just as quickly as he was made.
Right.
And I think that, to me, I mean, there's almost a claustrophobia to the movie when you realize everybody's, all the white people at least are part of this. And Black politicians are offered the option of getting a few crumbs to sell out their constituencies. Black people are not expected to be part of the patronage network. And Wynn's achievement in the movie, and part of it is because the Black community in this movie is not particularly well organized. And there's this amazing point. I don't want to get into everything that's but basically Wynn is faced with major moral conundrums about how to approach a kind of fucked up situation of police brutality, which is like very clear, but also of false accusations by a couple of Black teenagers toward a white. Basically, they're saying a white guy that they beat up because they were angry at the white cops. They're saying that the guy had come on to them because he was gay. And so homophobia is being mobilized by his sort of political opponents within the Black community to sort of create constituencies for themselves in the most cynical way of reading. And this is one of the things that I appreciate about Sayles, is that he's willing to be this cynical about everyone's politics, right?
Right.
And so Wynn has a choice of basically he knows this isn't true. He knows it's messed up. He doesn't want to play into homophobia. He goes and talks to an ex-mayor, a Black mayor. I don't think he was the ex-mayor of this town. I think he must have been another New Jersey town. But like one of the famous Black mayors of the 70s and early 80s, right, who came in on the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement, and basically talks about the political compromise you make to represent your people. I mean, I think it's brilliant political work, and he has to, like I was saying before, he has to align as best he can his morals, his political goals, and his political power, and he's able to do that by basically able to find a compromise on, basically by doing a little bit of a moral break on the police brutality case by basically pushing it under the rug. And then, I mean, dealing with it. I mean, the police. Well, it's not a police brutality case. It's the case of the two boys who beat up the guy. Right. It's not actually the police. It's just the police actions help to lead toward it. And then redirecting a community meeting toward marching on the mayor to protect them from gentrification. So he's able to play that. He's able to mobilize. What he's able to do is mobilize the black community enough that they can get a piece of the pie. Because the reason they can be pushed around is because they're not organized enough.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's just an incredible portrayal, but I don't want to call what Sayles is saying in that quote like romanticizing. He's not, but I think there's some truth to that, but I wouldn't say that's the thesis of the movie. Like that patronage can benefit some people, and it's understandable when people do it, but not that it's an overall good, because it seems horrific in this city.
No, that's what I'm saying. I think it's an interesting nuanced thing. And also, I was playing just that clip slightly out of context. Like they're asking, him questions about the broader themes that he's bringing up within the film. So he's not giving it as like this is what I was doing with the movie. He's just talking about that as a theme that he examines one kind of angle of, or a few angles of really within this one, which is great. It's one of those, he's one of those filmmakers too that like there's a great book that I think was like the BFI series put out that was Sayles on Sayles. So just a collection of his interviews talking in depth about his films. And one of the reasons I love reading that book or rereading chunks of that book every time I watch a Sayles movie is he knows the topics that he's examining in his film so well. He's not just talking about like, oh, then I placed the camera here and I told him to do this because I wanted to express this. Like he has this deep history. Like he talks about, he goes into a lot of detail about the history of the Wobblies when you read his interviews about Matewan, which is like, that's not part of that story.
Right.
But like, he knows that history. So right. I think it's just interesting that he's that well-versed and he knows what he's talking about. And he knows what he's looking at beyond just what you see in the films that he's made. And specifically in this one, he just has like a depth of knowledge and kind of political analysis a little bit in that particular case where he's saying like, well, wait, let's see, like maybe is this always bad? Like, let's not say it's cut and dry all the time. Like in the particular case of the character Wynn you were just talking about, like he practices a little bit of patronage, I think, as well, because he gets his brother-in-law a job because of the position of power that he has within the community.
Right.
So, his brother-in-law out of jail, but, served his time. He gets him, it's a night shift. It's a shitty night shift job, just like guarding a local electronics store with a fake gun. But that also kicks into gear a whole plot or one of the plots where, Vincent Spano's character, Nick, is attempting a robbery with two other, local hoodlums, aren't too bright. And that's what kicks into gear, like Nick's whole kind of downfall when he walks off the job. Then he gets wrapped up in like a dumb robbery idea where they get caught immediately. And then Nick has to go on the run. So the cops are looking for him. That forces Nick's dad, the Tony LoBianco character, to try to like make some deals with like the gangsters he has ins with because he is working for them, even though he doesn't really want to talk about that all the time. Which is fascinating because like you just mentioned this one thing of like patronage that Wynn practices to get his brother-in-law a job. And then it connects through to like all of the threads in the story, like that one decision, which is really fascinating. And like you said, like you've got a character who's probably got like the best moral compass, and he's still practicing a bit of political patronage because in his position of power in the community, he's able to like, hey, I got up somebody for this job for you. And the guy that runs the electronics store that does hire Wynn's brother-in-law, he clearly expresses like, I do you a favor, you do me a favor. Like in that scene when he gets him the job.
Yeah. But he's horrified by that, right? He really didn't mean it to be that.
But that's what it is.
That is what it is. I mean, it's, he's not trying to create that sort of system, and he mobilizes on causes ultimately, but he's still doing it because it's part of the job, right? It's a little bit of the, it's the little thing.
Potentially a huge help to his brother-in-law, who's like, an ex-con now, served his time, but like, who's going to hire him?
Right. Who's going to hire a black ex-con?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, part of the thing about Nick's downfall is the other thing is that he gets into a relationship with someone whose ex-husband is a piece of shit cop who, I mean, there's an interesting bit here who, I mean, spoilers again for the ultimate end of the movie, to be clear, for just a couple minutes, who shoots him. But part of what's interesting about that is it's both the hooliganism of the cops and the sheer degree to which they are sort of they're part of the ethnic machine, but also the limits of the Sayles is very aware of the racial and class politics of this. So that, sure, this is somebody who's been on the run as a criminal, but we've seen how they treat black people in the city And if they'd shot a black person, from what we've seen, the other cops wouldn't have turned on him. But when the ex-husband shoots Nick, or gets into an altercation where he shoots Nick, it's not clear, how bad it is yet. The other cops turn on him because, that's over the line. This is a member of your community at a certain level. You can be brutal, but like you're being an asshole and you were off and it's over your own personal bullshit.
Well, it's also that there was a warrant out for Nick's arrest. And because his dad called in some favors with Lawrence Tierney, who plays kind of like, I guess, the top-ish gangster that we see in this particular environment, the arrest warrant, the warrant is taken away. So even the cops like, oh, we're not looking for him anymore.
Right.
So there's that element to it as well. And then they try to take away his gun and all that stuff. And there is like that back and forth of just like, but you're cops too, Brothers in Blue kind of bullshit going on there. But yeah, it's one of those like his dad. Well, that's what tragedy is like. Nick's dad does call in his gangster favor, basically to get the heat off of Nick, and then
Right.
It's gone like that. But it's too late because he's already not for different reasons. He's pissed off this now off-duty cop who's the one who ends up killing him.
I mean, this is certainly an effective study of masculinity as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. There was another aspect of film I wanted to bring up that I thought was kind of interesting. And I don't know if I would have caught this element if, one, we didn't have the theme of this particular show that we do, but also since we're really looking at, as the American urban landscapes that we're looking at in these films. And that is that most scenes in this movie take place in public spaces. You've got restaurants, you've got the streets themselves, you've got bars, you've got police stations, you've got garages, you've got community meetings, you've got, even the Wynn character, like we said, the Joe Morton character, like he's just hoofing it out, talking to constituents. Like he's just out and about. I don't think we see him in his office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting. And I think this is when I started thinking about like I said earlier, the discussion we had in the Communism on Film episode that we did, where you have, like in this case, a leftist filmmaker with his own political agenda that he isn't overtly like packaging into his movies, but is there if you're looking for it, that he places these characters, all of these characters in these public spaces within the community, which also allows the camera to just move so smoothly between different narratives as another character passes by that the camera just starts following, and we get an update on this character, then we follow over to this character. So it allows you to transition along that, but it also gives you this idea that all of these small parts or characters are playing their own role, wittingly or not, in a larger, I guess, sort of system, which could either be the city or the story in general. And that's how you get all these people are interconnected in ways that the characters themselves aren't even aware of.
Right.
At the same time. I thought that was interesting. And then the times that he does choose to have more like, intimate moments, a lot of those even are still taking place. Like when Nick starts hitting on and then dating Angela, like they're still in public moments a lot together. So even when you're having these intimate moments, it's still like out on the street or like in the Italian restaurant.
Yeah, no, I think, it's interesting. This is a model of movie. You compare this early on, and you're not the only one to The Wire.
Yeah.
And then, there's a spate of movies like Syriana and some others, right, where it's like these multi-casts of people being sort of tied together in ways they don't really see.
Yeah, I was thinking like Traffic even. That's early 2000s. It's definitely after this one, but
right.
The usual movie that everybody shits on for it is like Crash, winning Best Picture. Multi-character LA, another American urban landscape, just saying, but we're not covering that one.
But no, we're not doing that movie. I mean, it will be an interesting one politically, but oh no.
But it would just be us yelling for 2 hours, which may be fun, maybe not. We'll see. But I mean, we probably won't see. But it's interesting that Sayles is doing this, and the time period is because this movie, again, City of Hope is 91. And the ones that we're talking about, these ensemble pieces of Traffic and Crash and Syriana, like that's 2000s and later. So like it's actually a trend that comes up like a decade after this movie comes out. I would say actually let's just rewind a couple years and look at 1989, Do the Right Thing.
Right.
Oh, and there you go, another different American urban landscape. But that's a multi-character ensemble piece, possibly Spike Lee's masterpiece that does looks at a lot of the same stuff this movie does as far as interconnected characters in a specific urban environment. So yeah, there's also The Wire, but again, that comes into the 2000s. But The Wire and sort of modern TV, I think, comes out of this because this feels like it could be a pilot for a TV series, although it's over like 2 hours. I guess maybe the running time's a little wrong there, but
right.
Because I think it's because it has that novelistic kind of essayistic approach to storytelling.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know, I'd respond to that type of story. Or actually even like in 1990, I think that's the right date, Slacker, the Richard Linklater film. Which is another, American urban landscape with Austin, Texas. But this movie has a plot structure the way that Slacker just explores unique characters with a wandering camera.
I've never seen Slacker. I really need to get around to it.
Well, I also say too, I think what also shows the brilliance of John Sayles in this one is that every single character is unique, interesting, has their own arc, their own unique voice when they are talking and doing their thing in the movie. And they're also all memorable. Like nobody just sort of falls into the background. Like once you've seen the movie, you're like, oh, that Angela Bass character. Oh, yeah, there's this really cool scene when she's talking to Joe Morton, or Wynn plays her husband in this one. Or like Chris Cooper pops up briefly, working at the construction site, who does Nick a solid because he worked with his older brother and respected him and his dad. Let alone, like we said, like John Sayles is in there playing Carl, like the kind of on the street guy who kind of organizes a lot of the crime for different folks at various degrees of the hierarchy of the criminal underworld here. Let alone David Strathairn, who plays Asteroid, a clearly some guy who's got some serious some mental issues, but is clearly homeless and just kind of wandering the streets in and out of the police station every now and then, and has what I think is like this amazing scene that John Sayles holds on at the very end of the movie. That's just heartbreaking.
And heartbreaking, and also representative of, I think, sort of the perspective of the movie, right? I mean, he's calling for help, but of course he's doing so in a way that's sort of not really calling for, he's echoing, right, just what he's hearing without actually
all of the characters know him as like the local crazy person, so they don't take what he says seriously at all. So like, This is not the one you want calling for help.
Well, no, but that's just it, is right. Nobody's really listening.
Right.
Nobody's really listening as things fall apart.
Yeah.
We need help over here! Help! Over here! Over here! In the building! Over help! Over here! Over here in the building! Help! We need help! Help! We need help over here in the building! Help! We need help! We need help! We need help over here! We need help over here! Help in the building!
So yeah, I think that's in a way that Falling Down we were a little bit more mixed on, Isaac, with this American Urban Landscapes. We were both saying like it's an interesting film, but it's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
I have no reservations in saying I think this is one of the best John Sayles films I've seen that he's made. I do have 2 or 3 left to catch up on to get his full filmography, but I think visiting this movie again and again over the years, I'm going to find even more interesting little nuance and things that I didn't catch because there's just so much in this.
Oh, it's superb.
Yeah.
It's really superb. I think it's definitely one of my favorites that I've seen of his.
And actually, I have to say, since you were just saying you haven't seen Slacker, one of his I haven't seen is Return of the Caucus 7. So I think
I do like that one more than this.
We've discussed in the past. I think that would be the next John Sayles movie we'd be tackling on the show.
Oh, I think so.
But so we're not tackling that one next. We're going to continue. We got a couple more films we've picked out in our American urban landscape examination. What have we got up next, Isaac?
Well, we're actually going back in time. We've done 2 early 90s movies. And now we're going to... But we're going to keep on the white ethnics. This wasn't a movie just about white ethnics. This was a movie about this whole full spectrum of life in the city. But we're going to be doing Michael Romer's The Plot Against Harry from 1971. Now, last time we covered Michael Romer, it was his incredible and underseen Nothing But a Man from 1964.
Indeed.
But if anything, this is more underseen. Because all of his stuff is really underseen. And this is a movie about a small-time Jewish racketeer just out of prison, who finds himself in an old neighborhood that he can't recognize anymore, which, might fit with some of the other things we've talked about so far.
Seems like it. Is this one in a named city at all? Do you know? Or
I think this is going to be in New York. The truth is, I haven't watched it yet. Should we admit that?
Well, we have the last two movies we've done in this series because neither one of us had seen Falling Down, neither one of us has seen City of Hope, and neither of us has seen The Plot Against Harry. So this is also the first comedy we've done, although I guess some people will say that Falling Down is a comedy. But
yeah, well, no, that's true. I mean, I'm just really looking forward to Michael Romer because he's just, I mean, he's an incredible director that made, what, 3 movies? And
features, I think, there's like maybe 4, I want to say. I forget, but
basically no one saw them.
Oh, right. Yeah. When Nothing But a Man is your most seen film, and that's not a known film. So we are going to stick with our coverage of obscure films at the moment.
Yep.
And The Plot Against Harry, 1971. That is up next for us. But before we officially sign off, we always like to do the friendly reminder to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you do enjoy the show or a particular episode, share it, please. We're also up and running on the usual blah, blah, blah social medias. Just look at the show notes if you're interested in following us there. And until next time, I am Aaron.
I'm Isaac, and stay safe out there. Our society has decided to give up, by and large, on dealing with COVID, and right now everybody's getting sick. And it's admittedly a lot less deadly in this particular wave than it has been, but obviously it's very dangerous to anybody who's immunocompromised. And so stay safe in our never-ending pandemic.